Hey everyone, welcome to another brand new episode of CPOV Autographs. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon, your host, and today we are doing my 2022 year in review. Sorry this month's episode is a little on the late side. I got buried in a bunch of other stuff, had some personal things go on, but February we're going to get it back on track. We're going to go back to the third Tuesday of every month, but thank you for your patience while I sort this out. Also, really quick before I get into the meat of this episode, Fun and Games, my video game podcast, just launched a Patreon. It's patreon.com/funandgamespod. Super easy to find. I'll put a link in the show notes. But if you're looking for a way to support me or supported my old Patreon years ago, where we would do shout outs on this very show, you can now support Fun and Games and get shout outs on that show. And you know what? Even if you don't listen to the pod, but you want to support the work that I'm doing, that's a really great way to do it. And so again, just go to patreon.com/funandgamespod and you can support at the $3, $5, or $10 level. Anyway, enough pitching, enough spieling. Let's talk about some of my favorite stuff from this year. Doing these solo podcasts have become harder as I've started doing more interviews and, you know, the life has taken off on all of my other podcasts. But I do love doing these year-end reviews because I really get to just spend some time talking about some of my favorite stuff. And some of that favorite stuff was the stuff I'm about to mention. I don't know where I'm going with this. My first favorite thing I want to talk about is my favorite video game of last year in 2022, which was Citizen Sleeper. I talked about this at length in many places, especially on Fun and Games, the podcast I have previously mentioned. But Citizen Sleeper is a game mostly made by one person, and it is a incredible life sim kind of dice rolling, tabletop feeling video game where you play as a sleeper, which is a robot essentially with a human consciousness, because people sell their consciousness to corporations to then be used as working class laborers. They are considered second class citizens. This game deals a lot with oppression and being abused and looked down on. The narrative is incredible. The music is incredible. The writing is incredible. The cast is awesome. It's I think a 5 to 8 hour experience with the DLC, maybe 10 hours at most. It's one of my favorite games of all time now. It's my favorite game of last year, my favorite indie game of last year. If you have not played Citizen Sleeper yet, I can't recommend it enough. It is available on the Nintendo Switch and on Steam. Please go play it. It is a perfect handheld game if you are looking for something to play right before bed or in some downtime in handheld mode on a Steam Deck or on a Switch. And I cannot recommend it enough. Please go play Citizen Sleeper. I don't want to go into too much detail here because I've done it in other places, and also because I want it to be fresh and a surprise for those who have not checked it out yet. My favorite movie of the year, surprising literally nobody, is Everything Everywhere All at Once. It is the best multiverse movie ever made. Michelle Yeoh is an actress who I've loved for ages and just absolutely kills it in this film. The whole cast is stellar. The highs are really high. The lows, the emotional lows, are really low. It is such a heartfelt film that can make you laugh 1 minute and cry the next. It is absolutely incredible. And if you have not seen this A24 film yet, please go see it right away, this minute, right now, because it is one of the most mind-blowing experiences I've ever seen on film. I've seen it multiple times. I cry every time I watch it. Please go watch that film. Next, on to my favorite TV show of the year. I talked about this one a little bit online, but I mostly didn't want to deal with the dregs of internet fandom when talking about it because a lot of folks had some strong opinions. But I really loved Netflix The Sandman adaptation. I'm a fan of the comics, though I haven't read them in a while, and the cast for this show is absolutely phenomenal. The person they cast as Dream is spot on how I would imagine this character, and the stories are great, the casting is great, the visuals are awesome. I'm so excited for the second season, which they've already announced. It's just, if you are looking for a good adaptation that diverges from the kind of monotony that we've seen a lot in the Marvel films, I cannot recommend the Sandman TV show enough. I think that it does the source material service while still kind of being its own thing and really kind of branching out. It does follow very to the T stories from the comics. Some of the most incredible stories, like The Diner, were adapted incredibly and unnervingly in this TV show. And so I highly recommend it. Try not to binge it. I think take some time between each episode. I think letting the episodes linger really add to the enjoyment of it. Up next, my favorite album of the year. Most of my favorites this year won't really surprise anybody if you follow me on Twitter, because I've talked about a lot of these things at length. But my favorite album is, of course, the brand new record by Carly Rae Jepsen, The Loneliest Time. I love the singles. I love the whole album. Carly Rae Jepsen continues to be one of the best pop stars writing and working right now. I love all of her work, and I've always been an obsessive for her music and just really good pop music in general. And if you are also a fan of really great pop music, then you should definitely listen to this record. But I listen to it constantly, at least once a week, if not more often. My favorite song of the year, however, comes from my second favorite album of the year, which is Cry Baby by Tegan and Sara. And the song, my favorite song of the year, is Smoking Weed Alone by Tegan and Sara. I've listened to this song on loop endlessly. It is one of the best written kind of indie pop tunes that I think I've ever heard. It's just so smartly constructed. It's fun to sing along to. And it's something really heartfelt. I became re-obsessed with Tegan and Sara, a band I've liked for a while. When I got to see them in concert right after the new album came out, I got to go with my incredible spouse, Sarah, who is the one who really got me into Tegan and Sara. And if you haven't heard that new record, Cry Baby, or the song Smoking Weed Alone, I really recommend looking it up and checking it out. All right, on to my favorite podcast of the year. There are so many. It's always so hard for me to narrow down. I've been very lucky to join some really incredible podcasting communities this year, and I've met some really incredible people, a bunch of them who have already done side quests for the Fun and Games feed, which has been great. And one of those people, Dave Jackson, also has an incredible podcast of his own. Two, actually, but my podcast of the year is going to Tales from the Backlog. It is a video game, a podcast tackling one game at a time from the backlog, as we all have endless backlogs of games we'd like to play or that we love to play that we'd like to talk about. And by the time you're hearing this, in less than a month, I will be a guest talking about Bayonetta 3, for better or worse. But it is an incredible podcast that starts off just kind of broadly talking about a game and then hits a spoiler wall about 2/3 of the way through, gives you fair warning, gives the guests plugs there so you can jump ship if you want and don't want to be spoiled, and still get a meaty podcast of like over an hour. And then the back half to third, depending on how long the episode runs, is all the spoilerful content involving the narrative and specific mechanics that were behind that spoiler wall. I cannot recommend this podcast enough if you're a video game fan. If you listen to any of my podcasts, I really do think you'll like Dave Jackson's show, Tales from the Backlog. So please go check that out. I've added one new category this year that I should have been doing sooner, I think, just because I spent a lot of time watching YouTube. I wanted to share my favorite YouTube channel of the year, and the one I'm sharing this year is one that I've loved for many years, but I think really stepped up their game to the next level, which is Ant Dude. I've been watching Ant Dude since 2015, I think, so almost a decade, which seems kind of insane. I've had the pleasure of meeting Ant Dude several times in person, and he's always very lovely. His channel is delightful. It tends to lean on the positive side of gaming, which anyone who knows me knows I love. He is very funny and a good writer and a great video essayist about video games, and has done things about the Luigi's Mansion series. He's a Kirby obsessive. He loves the Sonic games. He's done a wide range of stuff, and if you're looking for a video game YouTuber to talk about some of the games that they love or don't love or cover franchise retrospectives, I can't recommend Ant Dude enough. So check that out. And then last but not least of my favorite stuff of the year, I wanted to talk about my favorite book/audiobook. This is always a combined category because I rarely read books these days. I mostly listen to audiobooks because it's easier for me to absorb the information. But my favorite audiobook of this year is written by a previous guest of this very show, the one and only Jesse Hempel, and it is The Family Outing, a memoir. And this is a book that was written during the pandemic. Jesse interviewed all of her family members who all came out in some degree or another, whether they transitioned, whether they came out about their sexuality, or even Jesse's mother, who came out about a horrific incident that happened when she was younger and never really told anybody about. And it is just a brilliant, fascinating, heartwarming, and heartfelt book. I can't recommend it enough. Jessie is brilliant. I loved having her on the show and getting to hear her story, and now getting to read this book, which we were talking about just briefly when she was on the show. Now that it's here, I can't recommend it enough. If you've always wanted, if you've always had trouble sharing your story or wanted to share your story or have shared your story and it didn't go the way you want or it did, I think there's a lot to relate to in this book. And it's just a really fascinating look at the different ways that we hide ourselves from the world and how we finally learn to overcome and share our true self with the world on any level. So I can't recommend it enough. Again, that's The Family Outing, a memoir by Jesse Hempel. Also, check out Jesse's podcast, Hello Monday, produced by my incredible spouse, Sarah Storm. It is an incredible podcast about how the nature of work is changing. And it's not just about finding jobs or different kinds of jobs, but it's about our perceptions of jobs and work and why things are changing, the directions they're trending. They talk with tons of incredible professionals. They've even interviewed Guillermo del Toro. It just kind of runs the gambit of work and what work means in a modern era, not just the nature of office jobs. You know, it's much broader than that. And I think you should absolutely check it out. It is definitely worth your time. I'm going to not be too long in the tooth with this year. You know, it usually runs 45 minutes to an hour, but I think this is going to be on the shorter side because honestly, I don't want to ramble at you too much in this episode. I want to kind of regroup. I'm excited. I already have my guest for February, and we're gearing up for guests for the future months. And so I have some really cool stuff around the corner that I can't wait to share. But I did want to talk about some really exciting moments and things that happened to me this past year in 2022. For one, I was hired as the freelance editor for the Game Informer show, hosted by my friend and the incredible video editor and talented documentarian, the one and only Alex Van Aken. I have had the pleasure of guesting on said show as well. Game Informer is a magazine I've read since I was, in high school. And to be a part of anything that magazine and that website touches now is brilliant. I love doing it. I love being the editor for the show. Everyone over at Game Informer has been really supportive and kind. I've gotten to know a ton of the other writers and editors over there too, and even the editor-in-chief. And so it's just a really cool place, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And I'm endlessly thankful that I was offered that gig and get to continue to do it even into 2023. On this very show, I got to interview Patrick Klepek, a games journalist and someone who I've respected, who's been making things and writing about games for a very long time. I followed his career from G4 to Giant Bomb to Waypoint. I've gotten to see him do incredible stuff, and I've always wanted to get to have a chat with him on this very show, and I got to this year. And he was just as delightful as I had hoped. He was really kind and sweet and understanding. He was really generous with his time. Our conversations were great. Nothing was too stupid to ask. Nothing was off limits. Like, we just had a really wonderful and engaging conversation. And if you have not yet listened to that episode, I cannot recommend it enough. But it was definitely a career highlight for me, as I've wanted to chat with Patrick for quite some time. I also got to go to the Night of the Coconut premiere. For those who don't know, Patrick Willems, who is a video essayist on YouTube and also a director and writer and actor, finally released the feature film version of the end of his narrative with the Charles saga called Night of the Coconut. And I was lucky enough to go to the premiere. I got to see the film in a theater. I got to hear Patrick and Dave, the agent, get interviewed by Adam Lance Garcia, and they did a little talk back after it. I got to meet Patrick's mom, which was the coolest and biggest highlight of the night, of course. It was just a really fun experience. I had never been to a movie premiere before. Well, that's not true. I've been to one movie premiere prior to this, but this is the most awesome movie premiere I've ever been to, and only the second one I've ever gotten to go to. I'm a big fan of Patrick's work. I am lucky enough to call him a friend, and I was so excited to get to go to this premiere. Patrick then, of course, a few months later, came on this very show, made his return solo without the Torpy brothers to chat about the film and the future of his channel. It's been so fun supporting him on Patreon and just kind of sticking with him and going on this ride. I love Patrick's work, and to be even a small part of that work and his world is endlessly incredible, and I'm completely humbled and honored to be in any way a part of that. We also did a run of Patrick-related guests, including Brian Matolius and Dave the Agent, which was a blast to have as well. Both of those folks are also really incredible humans and wonderful guests that I'm grateful to have had on the show. For the first time ever, I got to cover PAX West in Seattle. I'd never been to Seattle before. I'd never been to PAX West before. I got a media badge to cover the event. I got some incredible interviews, including with folks at Limited Run, at Yacht Club Games, and Way Forward, which are some of my favorite studios and creators out there on the market. That was super exciting for me. I also got to go back to PAX East for the first time since 2020. When I started making my media connections, I got to reunite with friends like Kenneth Shepard, Jesse Vitelli, and so many, many, many more, Eric Van Allen, all sorts of awesome folks, as well as get to meet for the first time folks I'd known through the internet in the games industry as well. That event I got to cover as well. It was so much fun. Jeff and Frankie came as well. We got to cover the event as a group, which was really fun to do interviews. We got to air those interviews. All of us, along with a panel of incredible guests, got to do a panel about queer representation at PAX East that Frankie killed the moderation on. It was amazing. We got to book a ton of composers and developers this year on Fun and Games this past year. We spoke to a ton of indie creators, including the creator of Sleeper Citizen, one of my favorite games, Gareth Damian Martin. We got to, of course, talk to the folks who made Little Gator Game. We've gotten to talk to all sorts of really cool folks in and around the industry. We've been very lucky over the last few years to get those interviews, and it just seems to grow. We get to chat with incredible people. I'm still humbled that Grant Kirkhope, Yuri Lowenthal, tons of really great and incredible people within and around the game space want to talk to us, and we only continue to grow that. As I mentioned before, we launched a Patreon for Fun and Games at the beginning of this year that I am very proud of and excited about. If you've been looking for a way to support my work, that is the best way to do it at this very moment, and I would greatly appreciate if anyone wanted to join the Patreon and get a shout out in the episodes, get bonus content, all of that fun stuff. Screen Snark surpassed 100 episodes, allowed Rachel and I to do a fun episode about the origins of our media history and like what we grew up watching and why we wanted to do Screen Snark. This very show also surpassed 200 episodes. For our 200th episode, I brought back Steve and John, my co-hosts on the indefinite forever hiatus ended show Crash Chords. And we got to catch up. We got to chat about what's going on, modern music, things we've been up to. It was super fun to reminisce as the 200th episode, as this show, CPOV Autographs, used to be Crash Chords Autographs and was born out of that very show, Crash Chords. So that was really cool. There are probably other important moments from 2022 that I am not remembering. Of course, not everything was great, but I wanted to share my standout moments and things that were really awesome. There is one other standout moment I forgot to mention. I adopted a brand new puppy along with my spouse, Sarah Storm. We adopted Otis, who is my whole heart, who I love very much, who is sleeping right now as I record this. Thank God, because otherwise he'd be barking and running around. But I've always wanted a dog since I was a kid. I had a dog growing up as a little kid, and though Otis drives me crazy sometimes, I absolutely love him, and I'm so happy that Sarah and I brought him into our lives. Sarah and I often like to say he makes us feel complete. He makes our family feel complete, which is lovely. So I just want to shout out that I'm so excited to have Otis in my life. This is the part of the show where I do some thank yous. Again, I think this is going to be on the shorter side because I don't know. I want to figure out ways to evolve Autographs, but Autographs is my passion project. It's my monthly show. The stuff that I think I have the audience to grow and really expand, of course, are my other three podcasts, Screen Snark, Fun and Games, and Reignite. If you're not checking out those other shows, please do. I greatly appreciate it. They are awesome. My co-hosts are awesome. But I have some thank yous. Just people I want to thank. People I've worked with, people whose work I respect and admire, people who I've never met but I really like and do cool stuff. It's just my way of kind of sharing my heart with folks that have had a huge impact on my life and my career, whether they know it or not. So thank you first and foremost, of course, to my incredible spouse, Sarah Storm, who without I would never be able to do any of this. Sarah supports me in every step of the way. Every time I've tried to pivot and grow the stuff that I'm working on, Sarah is right behind me. And Sarah, I can't thank you enough for always having my back, understanding, advising, and helping me grow the things that I love. So thank you, Sarah. Of course, I want to thank Otis, my incredible puppy, for being perfect. I want to thank Case Aiken, Hans, Steven the Cine Guy, J. Mike Folson, Jeff Moonen, Frankie, Rachel Quirky Shank, Brett, Sam, Ash, and Pat, Alex, Angela Bones Bullock, JD Martin, Robin, Nicole, Gloria, Kelsey, Rose, Victor Devon, Katie Bug, Robert Prine, Rob Starobin, I'm probably still not pronouncing your name correctly, Keith and Josue, John Lestrange, The Blurred Girl, Karama herself, Luke Lewis, Jacob McCourt, Patrick Willems, Scott White, Joey Mons, Patrick Klepek, Kato Rabzachny, because apparently that's the way it's supposed to be pronounced, Ren, Merritt K, John Warren, Ken Shepard, Eric Van Allen, Cam Hawkins, Celia B, Baron Rudis, Jesse Vitelli, Brendan Groom, Lucas White, Cam Koenig, Nathan Brandt, Jessica Howard, Kate Sanchez, Luis Almaya, Alex Van Aken, Marcus Stewart, Kyle Hilliard, Blake Hester, Wesley LeBlanc. That's how Wesley says it should be pronounced, so I'm giving it a shot. Wesley LeBlanc. It sounds weird if I don't say LeBlanc. Wesley, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I'm trying to pronounce your name. Charles Hart, Matthew Finneman, Derek Van Dyke, Rebecca Valentine, Justin, Brittany, Sam, Jeff, Rar, Charlotte, Pilnock, Audrey, Dave Jackson, Dave Petrangelo, Terrence Wiggins, Chuck, Sulfur, Ray Apollo, Tanya DePass, Brian Gray, Glenn Batishell, Aaron, and Jesse Hempel, and so many more. As Otis starts to wake up and come over to see what I'm up to, I should wrap things up. But there are tons of thank yous that I didn't even specifically mention by name. All of our guests this year on the show, all of my guests on all my shows. This is my opportunity to thank literally everyone who has touched my life and interacted with me. And even if I didn't thank you right here, if we have interacted on Twitter, on Hive, on Instagram, anywhere in the internet, through the podcast, emails you've sent to one of my podcasts, any of that. If we've interacted on any level, thank you. If you supported my work on any level, thank you. If you listen to any of my shows, thank you. I cannot thank you enough. Y'all are the reason I do this. I'm sorry that this year's year in review is a little shorter, but I mostly kept it to my favorites and then some standout moments. I didn't really want to review the events of the year. I think it was more important to keep it personal and light for me, but endlessly, again, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, music is life, and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.matt.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, aka Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.